Well, welcome. I'm so glad you could join us today. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and today I'm really excited to introduce you to Cynthia Girman, or Cindy, like she goes to. So, no chance of me forgetting her name here today. And we're going to be talking about negotiating past grief and addiction to find purpose. So, welcome, Cindy. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, for those of you who may not know her, Cindy's the founder of a consulting firm that designs and analyzes clinical trials to better understand how medicines work. We could certainly use that today. She holds a Doctor of Public Health in biostatistics. She's a fellow and former board of directors member on the International Society of, and I hope I don't bastardize this, Pharmacoepidemiology.
Yes, you got it.
And her husband collaborate with researchers at UNC on non-pharmacological technology as treatment for substance use disorders. So a subject definitely near and dear to my heart. So why don't we jump in, Cindy? I often say that negotiating our own mindset is our first and most important negotiation. And negotiating past grief is really challenging. I think we don't talk about it enough in open and healthy ways as society. And loss of a child is something I think most of us can't even contemplate. So tell us your story and how you managed to negotiate past the grief over the loss of your son.
Yeah, sure. It was devastating, as you alluded to. I mean, a mom losing a child, a
Yeah,
father losing a child. It just, even grandparents losing
yeah,
a grandchild. It's just devastating. It's just not supposed to happen in that order. Grief really increases the chance of you getting depression and anxiety. It's overwhelming. And I was in profound grief for months and
of
months
course.
and months. And it was really affecting everything about my life, of course. You just weren't sure you wanted to go on, and it's very difficult to be productive and to make decisions and
Yeah.
everything when you're in grief. So what happened to me, my story, is that I had mentioned maybe writing a book about my experience with profound grief and the experience of my son a few years before he passed away. He had struggled with addiction. He had ADHD and also high functioning autism. And I was thinking about writing a book, and I had mentioned it to a colleague who also happened to be a medium. And we ended up having a session and connecting with my son, Alec.
Right.
And during that session, she suggested to me to not only write the book, but to write it in my son's voice, to let his voice be heard from heaven, if you will.
Yeah.
And hence the name of the title of the book, A Voice from Heaven. He actually communicated through the medium that he would be honored to co-write this with me. And I was like, how in the world do I co-write a book with someone who is departed from this life? And the medium actually walked me through how to go about automatic writing, to sit down in the wee hours of the morning before dawn, like at 4 or 5 o'clock a.m. And while you're sort of still in a sort of semi-sleep state, almost a meditative state, don't drink caffeine or anything, just stay in that kind of state to let your sort of inner thoughts and
Yeah.
and thoughts from the spiritual realm come through. And it worked. I was
Yeah.
astonished. I was getting full sentences from my son, and I knew it was him because as a mother, you always recognize
Yeah.
your child's personality and the way
Yeah.
that they talk. I mean, I couldn't hear a voice, but the thoughts came into my mind. They just popped into my mind, and it was really amazing.
I'm going to stop you for 1 second on
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
just because I'm sure
please.
already there's people there's a lot of resistance and skepticism out there about automatic writing or anything that people consider woo-woo. They just reject it out of hand. So tell us a little bit about how you allowed yourself to be open to it, and can anyone use it?
Sure. So I had never ever had a prior psychic experience. This was completely new to me.
Okay.
I had gone to one medium before, and that was sort of a serendipitous kind of thing too, because it was about 4 months after our son died. My husband was on a plane, and the person that was sitting in what was supposed to be my seat, I didn't
Yeah.
go on the trip, they started talking, and she had lost a twin sister, and he shared about our son, and she gifted him a medium session.
Oh, wow.
Because I never
Wow.
would have, I'm not sure that I would have gone to a meeting. I just didn't even think about it.
What a
Um,
beautiful thing to do
it
as a
was a beautiful thing to do. And it really, really helped because it was in that first medium session that I learned a bit about the other realm, about, when you die, what happens when you die? We all wonder that, right? When you die, you are almost immediately consumed with this all-encompassing love
Yeah.
and total acceptance and welcoming. And there is the light at the end of the tunnel that we've all heard about.
Yeah.
My son described it as not really a tunnel, but tunnel-like. It was made of light,
Yeah.
swirling light in a circle, and there was this intense light at the end. But I had never really thought about the woo-woo kind of
Yeah.
aspects and everything. This medium session changed my whole outlook, because
Beautiful.
he communicated things to my husband and I that we knew, and only we knew, and
Yeah.
only the family knew. And
Yeah.
there was no way that anyone would be able to know about that except from a communication of that sort.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to try that way. I've thought about it many times over the year. My dad died way too young, and it's something that's always been sort of that niggling at the back of my head. So thank you for that kick in the pants. And so how did you learn to sort of negotiate past, if you will, or learn to live with your grief? What are some tips you would have for
Yeah.
our listeners out there who may be in grief at the moment?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is you have to experience the grief.
Yeah.
I think our natural reaction as humans is to suppress, profound emotions,
Yeah.
whatever extreme it is, almost, because it's difficult to handle them. They're overwhelming. You have to sort of experience the grief and kind of live through that a little bit before you can really start and find your path.
Yeah.
I found my path through this automatic writing, and by the
Oh,
communications that my son was giving me about him. I learned so
yeah.
much about myself, about my innermost feelings, about death and dying. I learned about my son and, some of the struggles that he had in his physical life and what he was doing now, which was amazing. He's a
Wow.
teacher in the afterlife. And it just changed my whole life. I mean, it was
Yeah.
seriously a life transforming experience
Yeah.
to co-write this book with my son. And it gave me hope for
Yeah.
when we die. There is a lot to look forward to.
Yeah. And I love your openness. And it's a good message for everybody out there, our listeners. Like, we do tend to bring such a high level of skepticism to things that we don't understand. And I mean, you're hearing from Cindy here what a great gift it was for her to allow herself that openness. And tell me about, I mean, I assume there was a lot of healing that came with writing this book in that process. Was that the case for you, Cindy?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. It's a shame that more people don't talk openly about grief. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to get this out there and to talk about it, is that, so many people, I mean, almost 86% of the United States population have experienced some kind of
Yeah,
grief. Everybody
of
experiences
course.
it, but we don't talk about it. It's like almost like it's a stigma.
Oh, taboo. Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, taboo, like somebody getting cancer or something. It's a taboo topic. You don't
Yeah.
you don't talk about it. I had even close friends and family that kind of ghosted me afterwards because
Yeah.
they didn't
People
know
don't
what
know
to
what to
say.
say.
Yeah, they don't
Yeah.
know what to say. Exactly.
Yeah.
So if we talked more openly about it, I think that so many people would be helped. I know that I was, with the writing of this book and talking about that with some friends and with my husband, of course, helped me tremendously to work through my emotions of death and dying. And
Yeah.
that, this was sort of what was meant to be, what was intended. We are here on earth to have an experience,
Yeah.
to learn. That's what
Yeah.
he communicated to me, and to learn how to be more loving and more compassionate as a human
Mhm.
being.
Oh, and we could use
I'm not
that.
sure we're doing a great job
No,
of.
I read, well, I love the message of your book, and it's very timely. So kudos to you and your son for that. I think we could definitely all use a lot more of that. What was one of the most sort of maybe surprising things or interesting things that you discovered while writing the book, while going through that
Yeah.
process?
I think one of the most surprising things for me was he described the interconnectivity of all things in the afterlife,
Mm,
and that he was connected to everything: the trees, the
yeah.
mountains, the rocks, the plants, the other human beings, And that interconnectivity was in an infinite number of dimensions. And the past, there's no time in the afterlife.
Yeah.
And so the past, the present, and the future were there all at the same time in different dimensions. And that
Yeah.
was just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah. Well, do you know what's interesting is you're saying that so much of this sounds like quantum physics,
Exactly.
when people first started talking about that, everyone just thought it was crazy. And now the science is catching up on all of these things that we thought were so woo-woo and kind of ridiculous out there theories before. And boy, could we use that lesson as well about the interconnectedness in terms of
Yes.
negotiating our best lives, negotiating our mindsets, being more intentional about how we show up in our interactions with other people,
Yes.
personally, professionally, and frankly, on the global scene as well. So tell us a little bit more about the book. I feel like I took you off track there. Like what would you say is the primary message, if you will, about the book?
Well, there were many messages in the book, but one of the things that he said strongly to me was, don't let life just happen to you.
Yes.
Make life happen for you.
Yeah.
And that resonated so much with me
Yeah.
because, we all get into a rut, of just kind of getting up, doing what we
Yeah.
have to do, and then going, kind of going through the motions.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so that really resonated to me, to get out in nature, to do things that I enjoy rather than just getting into that rut. The other thing that he was telling me is to let go of my fears. My anxiety increased a lot with my grief.
Yeah.
And I think that happens often. But his message was to let go of your fears so that you can enjoy your life more.
Yeah.
And that was a really nice message. And the third one that I'll just mention, that I already kind of mentioned, is, what our purpose is here, and that we are supposed to be learning how to, having experience to learn how to be more compassionate to others. And I think that's also part of healing. Part
Yeah.
of healing your grief is to give back, to give to
Yeah.
others, to help others, be grateful, and to sort of give back. Yeah.
Yeah. And I definitely want to circle back to that purpose piece. I think that's so important. And, that was when I first started having my epiphanies that led me down this path that, I founded Women on Purpose for exactly that reason. I
Right.
realize we don't talk a lot about it. It's something we should be teaching from elementary school, right? To be able to really tap into that. But you said something that really struck a chord with me. I want to put a bit of a pin in that for our listeners as well. It's this idea about being able to I guess what come to me is vulnerability versus victimhood, right? Like that being open, like when you said about don't let life happen to you, let it happen for you. There's a lot of talk now about vulnerability, which is great. We used to have that very stiff upper lip kind of approach where we didn't talk. So being more open, allowing ourselves to be vulnerable is great. But I do feel like there's a bit of a risk that we slip into that victimhood where it's like, oh, this is happening to me, as opposed to taking 100% responsibility for our experience of our life and,
Yeah.
the meaning that we attach to the things that happen to us and how that impacts us.
That's
Um,
so well said. I really was extremely vulnerable when I was putting out the book.
I
When I
love
was
that.
when I was writing it, and planning to publish it, and when it first came out, I was like, well, people are going to read my innermost feelings,
Yeah.
and that's okay,
Yeah.
because if it helps someone with their
Yeah.
grief, it's okay,
Yeah.
you know, to be vulnerable. I think that we do have to step up and say, well, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want to do today that will make me happy, that will
Yeah.
generate some joy in my life,
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I'd like to unpack the fear piece a bit because I think, Cindy, that's a really big lesson for people and one we often overlook. We are a very fear phobic society, and it's about I mean, we all experience fears, but rather than letting them paralyze us, like finding healthier ways to use that fear to fuel us, to not be afraid of failure, but to embrace it so that we overcome those obstacles in healthier ways. I'd love what were some of the insights you had around fear?
Well, I learned that I had a lot of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I will confess that I had a session with a medium to let go of some of those
Yeah.
fears because some of them went back to my childhood.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it happens. There are things that happen in our childhood that give us certain beliefs,
Yeah.
and we kind of hang on to those, and even if they're not appropriate when we're
Yeah.
older. So yeah, I learned a lot about the fears that I had, that many of them are not founded in good
Yeah.
basis, and
Yeah.
that it was kind of irrational for me to even have them. So letting go is a process, it takes a while, but I think I'm on my journey. And I think if you do have some anxiety or fears, understanding those fears is the first step
Yeah.
to releasing them, right?
And owning them, right? I talk
Yes,
a fair bit about this in my book as well. I think it's one of our primary blocks, right? For, I think generally, and for women in particular, right? That fear of
right,
hearing no, fear of rejection, fear of failure,
right.
fear of the unknown, all of these, there's such deep-seated conditioning around these that stop us from stepping into the most powerful versions of ourselves. So
Yeah. And fear of not feeling like you're enough.
absolutely.
Yeah, that
Absolutely.
is a big one. Fear of not feeling like you're respected,
Yeah.
or for your
Yeah.
work, or for what you're doing or contributing. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's a big issue. Yeah,
Yeah. And so much of that comes back to that internal versus external validation, right? Just as corny as it sounds, having absolute self love, right? Where we get our
right.
sense of worth from ourself rather than, and think how different the high school experience would be if we weren't always worried what everybody else was thinking about us. If we could
Yeah.
teach from a really young age that unshakable sense of self, what a different world it would be.
That was a huge focus as well in the book, to get to know your true inner self
Yeah.
and to love your true
Yeah.
inner self, because you can't really fully love others until you love yourself. And
Absolutely.
and that was a big message that came out.
Yeah. No, so let's talk for a sec about grief and negotiation, right? How do you, I mean, in your experience, how does grief affect the ability of people to be able to negotiate? And did you find a difference with women? I thought I remember reading somewhere that you'd said that there's, especially women can be plagued by this. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. I think women, in a way, are more affected by grief in general. They internalize it a lot, especially if they have other members of the family that they're trying to take care of and
Yeah.
everything. So I think there's that. I think grief affected everything about my life. I was in such profound grief. It was very difficult for me to work at first.
Yeah.
And even when I did start going back and working, it was very difficult to focus. My confidence wasn't quite what it had been. I was off my game, I was
Yeah.
really off my game. And so it really affects everything about negotiation, right?
Yeah.
Your confidence and your ability to really get in there and get engaged
Yeah.
with who you're negotiating with about the
Yeah.
decision. And it's just an overwhelming emotion, and that's another reason that I wish that we would be more open about
Yeah.
it, that we would discuss it more, that employers would recognize that it's an
Yes.
issue. I mean,
Yeah.
they expect you to come back to work and be
Oh,
productive,
yeah.
right?
3 days of bereavement leave or 5 days if you're late, like as if we could.
Exactly. I mean, it
Yeah.
changes you forever.
Yeah.
You never get over it, and you can learn to walk beside it, but you never really get over the
Yeah.
loss of someone that you really, really loved.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a void in your life, but you can learn to live with that and walk beside it and recognize that you're going to always have some bad days. You're
Yeah.
always going to miss them, but you have
Yes.
to get on with your life because
Yeah.
they would really want you to do that.
Yeah. And I love that we talked about that timing piece too, because I think there are certain, unwritten and unspoken expectations that there are time frames, right? Like you can grieve for
Yes.
this period of time, which is such a preposterous concept when you think, like, I remember with my dad, it would be years later and at the most unexpected time, Halloween, and suddenly I'd be just so profoundly affected and not exactly sure why, right? Just these unexpected moments when it comes up. And I thought you talked earlier, Cindy, about other people ghosting you and being uncomfortable. Do you have any tips for people about how to negotiate and interact more effectively with people who are grieving?
Yeah. Well, recognize it.
Yeah.
And, say, I know that this is really, really hard for you, and talk to them about it.
Yeah.
They actually want to talk about it.
Yeah.
They just don't want to make you uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But I think, it's difficult for people to open up and be willing to talk about it. I think it almost takes a certain personality that is there for you.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of tips, one of the biggest would be to recognize that this isn't on a time frame. This isn't going to go away, like you alluded to. It's not going to go away. Some people will grieve for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
It's not time to get over it. People say you need to get on with, get over it and get on. No, that's not true. When you lose someone that was really, really close to you and like your whole life, it's going to affect you. It's going to change you forever. I think you have to learn how to live with that piece.
Yeah. And I love that piece. Just talk about it. So if you're, for our listeners there, if you have somebody who is grieving right now, don't shy away from it. Don't make it a taboo subject and that just compounds the feelings of, total lack of empowerment. Like, own it, name it, talk about it, be open. If the other person doesn't want to, they'll let you know, but at least let them know this isn't a subject you're afraid of. And speaking of subjects we're afraid of, I mean, you've been open about your son and his addictions issues. And again, we pay a lot of lip service to being open to talking about that these days, but we got a long way to go. So I know from you, we got a long history of addictions in our family on both sides, and negotiating with somebody with addictions can be tricky. Just wondered if you had any quick tips for our listeners that you'd be open to sharing about, people who may be dealing with a loved one with addictions issues, and some tips on how to negotiate with them.
Yeah, it's really difficult to negotiate with somebody that is addicted.
Yeah.
I think first is recognizing that it is a disease.
Yeah.
That it's not something that you just pull pull yourself up by the bootstraps.
Yeah.
It's not something you can do that with. And I think recognizing that, and also recognizing that the person who is struggling has to really want to get on with it. And you can put somebody in recovery, but if they don't want to recover, they're not, it's a waste of time.
Yeah.
and I think they have to get to that point where they really want to get better.
Yeah.
And we need a lot more openness, less stigma, and more research. I really think
Oh
that
my gosh, yes, absolutely.
more research on treatments that are actually going to be very effective.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, we seem to be back in the dark ages in some ways with using the same methods, that were not effective, generations ago, frankly. So now you had mentioned purpose before, and I want to make sure you have a chance to sort of circle back to that. I know you're a big advocate of finding purpose, as am I, as a means to heal and beyond, frankly. So tell us just a little bit about the tips you may share with the audience about the importance of finding purpose, how to do it.
Sure. So that was one of the things that came out of my experience of writing this book was to recognize that, I need to really rethink and reprioritize my life. And one of the things that I really found that I needed to do was to help other people. And so I am helping others in grief through the book and other avenues. I am trying to raise money for research on more effective treatments for addiction with a technology, not a pharmaceutical product, with two professors at UNC. And 50% of the proceeds from the book are being given to that research.
Wow, beautiful.
And anyone who is interested in donating can go to my website and donate. It is a good cause. I think addiction is such a crisis in this country.
Absolutely. And I would say globally, frankly, but particularly in North America, it's just an epidemic. And COVID certainly did not help with those numbers, that's for sure. Now, when you mentioned about your website, don't be shy. Where can people learn more about you, Cindy, to be both you and the book?
Sure. It's www.wingsofpeacepress. That's one word, wingsofpeacepress.com. Nice. And there they can donate, and there's a donate button at the tab at the top. There's also a sliding screen that will come up asking if you would like to donate. And then you can learn more about the book and the reviews of the book, and some blogs are on there too.
Yeah, beautiful. And we'll make sure to put that in the show notes for our listeners. And I invite you, I mean, the book is a broad, self-help, personal development, and beyond, frankly. As you've heard from Cindy already, it talks about purpose, it talks about overcoming your fears, it talks about addictions, it talks about handling grief. So it's a really broad-based book that I think anybody can get some value out of. And Cindy, I normally like to end by asking, what's one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had in your life? Doesn't have to be on this topic, just one of those things that's like a little aha that makes you think differently or show up differently.
Yeah, yeah. I have to say it was this experience. It was so astonishing, and it really changed my focus, really transformed my life, changed my focus from, the accumulation of success measures that we usually think of, which is like, money and cars and houses and, and all of that,
Yes.
and gaining the respect of others in your field and stuff like that, to, oh, I want instead to be measured by how I'm impacting other people and how I'm helping them.
Oh gosh, I know that resonates with me. I mean, it's, one of the big parts of my mission is having people reframe how we define success. Yeah. Our
Mhm.
media, all of the avenues are pushing us to defining success based on very competitive models, very monetary commercial models. And I think that's one of the reasons the world is so out of balance right now. So
Yeah.
thank you for joining us and thank you for all the great work that you're doing, Cindy.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for our listeners, I have no doubt there's lots of value here for you. Please give the gift of sharing. Make sure you share this episode, share these concepts, share Cindy's books with people in your life who you think could get some value from the message. And before we sign off today, as always, I'd like to share just some ways that we can work together if you happen to be looking for ways to up-level your negotiation skills, remembering that all of life is a negotiation. I've got everything from online to group to my signature one-on-one mastermind and VIP experiences to help you better leverage your innate power to get more of what you want and deserve to live that purpose-driven life. If that sounds interesting, check that out at artoffemininenegotiation.com. And for heaven's sakes, if you haven't got my book yet, make sure to grab a copy of The Art of Feminine Negotiation. You can get that online or at a bookstore near you. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, go forth and negotiate your best life on your terms so you can stop missing out and start getting more of what you want and deserve from the boardroom to the bedroom. Until next time, everyone take care.